Hey everyone, before we dive in, just a quick note. The views and opinions shared by our guests on Reset Critical are their own and don't necessarily reflect those of the institutions they represent, the host, producers, or any of our partners or sponsors. Some episodes touch on sensitive topics, so listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Reset Critical, a podcast where we aim to rise above the noise, the clickbait, and the twisting of facts to level set some of today's most important conversations. Like many of you, I have felt disheartened, frustrated, and confused by much of what we see in the American political landscape, especially the weaponization of important issues that should be nonpartisan, the twisting of facts and the outright lies, and the efforts to erode some of our fundamental rights as citizens and residents of this country, such as due process, equal protection, and rights to privacy, dissent, and free expression. This has led to a deep polarization of large segments of our society and communities along political lines. And against this backdrop, we are exposed to stories and images of brutality, oppression, and violence by government agencies, both here and abroad. And honestly, it's exhausting and can sometimes feel completely hopeless. So, today, to help us think through some of these very real concerns and to share her work as a leader in the Democratic Party, we are joined by Congresswoman Yasamin Ansari. Yasamin Ansari is the Congresswoman for Arizona's 3rd District, and in January of 2025, she was sworn into the U.S. House of Representatives as the youngest woman in the 119th Congress and the first Iranian American Democrat. And before that, she served as vice mayor of Phoenix and was the youngest woman elected to the Phoenix City Council. She joins us today virtually from Washington, D.C. Welcome, Congresswoman Ansari.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, how are you doing today? I know there's a lot going on in all of our worlds, but particularly in yours.
Yeah, I'm okay. It's been another unprecedented week. I would say the 119th Congress, whether you're a freshman like me or a member who's been here for decades, it's been unprecedented event after unprecedented event, and I think we've all really been pushed to come up with new ways to fight back against kind of the authoritarian and corrupt nature of the Trump administration. So I'm okay, but a lot has been going on these last few weeks, and I know
Yeah,
we're going to dive into
yeah,
them.
as we've seen. So let's talk about some of that. You have been such an advocate for the Democrats against some of the most egregious things we're seeing from this administration. And I want to get into just a few of those in the time that we have. So let's start with ICE and the immigration raids. So, do you think our immigration enforcement system is broken beyond repair? Can ICE be reformed? And how do we move forward from this mess?
These are really, really great questions. Look, over the last year or so, I have seen firsthand the way that Donald Trump has turned ICE into his own personal paramilitary force, starting from the beginning of 2025 when he was inaugurated. Donald Trump set these mass quotas for mass deportation that really were not based in any sort of real data or real evidence in terms of criminals or people that had any violent records, which is, of course, what he said in the campaign. So we've seen ICE terrorizing people across this country. Of course, we've seen an invasion of Minnesota. And I have been on the ground there and really saw that firsthand. And the detention centers in this country as well that are run by ICE, but really operated by these two private prison giants who are making billions of dollars off of this cruelty as policy. I don't think that ICE in its current form can be reformed. And again, I've seen the violence. I mean, we've had ICE murder multiple American citizens. The leadership under Kristi Noem refuses to take any accountability, and in fact, I think really worsened and exacerbated the situation by immediately calling, these individuals domestic terrorists or assassins. And we've also heard directly from whistleblowers. We had a hearing a couple of weeks ago, it was joint with the Oversight Committee on the Senate side. And we heard from whistleblowers who left ICE. They were in senior level positions who said very clearly that they were told to not follow the US Constitution, that they could break down doors without judicial warrants and to really do whatever it takes to take people and detain them and eventually deport them. So the actions have been completely unconstitutional. You have thousands of untrained ICE agents who are being instructed to not follow the law. It's incredibly dangerous. And now we've seen the impacts of that, in so many places, including in my district. I mean, we've had awful raids. I have a constituent with cancer who's in a detention center. She's being denied medical care and being denied access to an oncologist and a treatment plan. We've had a record number of deaths in ICE custody, and the conditions are just horrific. I mean, I think it's going to be a moral stain on this country for decades to come.
Yeah. And it's really hard to watch, I think, for many people who are just listening to the stories and seeing the images, it's like one step removed. But when you have a loved one who's actually experiencing this firsthand, I mean, people have died under these conditions, right? And I think somehow we got to get back to that human level. So, how do we, when you have people in the highest offices like just ignoring the Constitution, ignoring court orders, ignoring the law, like where do we go from here? If it can't be reformed, what do we do? I mean, we got 3 more years under this administration, unless they change course or they change their mind about how they approach this. What are we going to do for the next 3 years at least?
Look, I think there's a lot that we can do, but it's certainly going to get worse before it gets better. And I say that because of the funding that ICE has already been given by Republicans and by Donald Trump last year in the reconciliation bill and what is commonly known as either the big beautiful bill or the big ugly bill, depending on what side you're on. But ICE was given $75 billion. And so that's why they have such a massive slush fund right now, where they're buying up warehouses to turn into detention centers. They're buying up vehicles to expand ICE enforcement capacity in various states. And they have a lot of money and they have no accountability. However, the tide is changing in terms of the perception and the public pressure. After these horrific murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good, we've seen that the American public no longer supports this. I mean, Donald Trump is underwater when it comes to immigration enforcement. The majority of Americans think ICE has gone too far. And even support for the abolishment of ICE, there's been polling that's had it as high as 50%. I mean, that is really, really telling for where the American public is. I had a constituent in my district call me who was a 80-year-old lifelong Republican who called me to say, Yasemin, we need to defund ICE. So the sentiment, is not with them. It's not supported. Even law enforcement has spoken out because this makes their job more difficult. I mean, it's decimating trust between the public and law enforcement in general. Whether that be local, state, et cetera, because of the way federal law enforcement is acting and operating. So, I think right now where that change can happen, there's an ongoing fight in the Senate with the DHS budget. Democrats so far have held firm on not voting to give more funding to the Department of Homeland Security unless significant reforms are made to ICE. So that is an important fight. And I think for the public's perspective, it's important to keep the pressure on those Democratic senators to make sure they hear from you and they know that it's unacceptable to give another dime to this agency without significant reforms. You're also seeing pretty significant support for impeachment of Kristi Noem. I was an original co-sponsor on articles of impeachment. I think it has almost 100 co-sponsors right now. There's reporting that says even Donald Trump is asking around of Republican congressional leaders to see what the appetite is for firing her, because she's also demonstrated to be extremely corrupt. I mean, she spent hundreds of millions of dollars on luxury jets for herself, while again, absolutely decimating trust between the public and law enforcement and really causing harm to people. So the change is happening. It's not going to be overnight. The midterms are critical for real checks and balances. And we're only just a couple of months away from that. And I don't think that we can take the midterms for granted and just assume that there's so much backlash and so much unhappiness with the administration that we're going to win. We really need people to be involved, to organize, to vote, but to get outside of their normal comfort zone and to get more involved
Yeah.
civically and in the political process this year.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. Several things you said resonate with me so well. And that is, we just can't give our power away, especially in this moment. And your voice, your vote, your contacting of your representatives matter, especially when we see there's fracturing within the Republican Party itself around some of these issues. So we got to figure out, because, I believe some of these issues, like a lot of these issues, like they just transcend political party lines. These are moral issues. These are ethical issues. They're not, we shouldn't have an immigration enforcement system. Of course, every country needs an enforcement system for their immigration laws, but is this the right one? Right. And I think these are the questions we have to be asking ourselves. And then the thing you said about private companies running these immigration systems, I mean, this is a business. People are making millions and millions of dollars off of this. And so when your end motive is bottom line and money in your pocket, public safety and accountability take a back seat. So I think
Yes.
once we begin to frame it in this kind of and look at it in this perspective, I think people would begin to realize that we got to do things differently. So I appreciate that. I wanted to move on to another issue that has had the nation and really the world captivated for many years, and that is the issue of the Epstein files. And I know you've been very active on this issue to make sure that the American people have access to the truth. I know it's been an uphill battle, it's been a really long battle. And so tell us what you're seeing from your vantage point after the release of the Epstein files. I know you've been involved in the depositions of the Clintons, for example. Break it down for people who haven't had the time to like look through the thousands and thousands of pages of what's available to the public.
So this has been a crazy journey so far. It really started last year, when Attorney General Pam Bondi had this press conference outside the White House. You had these MAGA influencers who said they were going to release the Epstein files. And Donald Trump, of course, campaigned on this issue. And it became clear pretty quickly within those next few months that this wasn't going to happen. So it's been really, interesting and telling to see how it's all unfolded. We started really pushing last summer to get the Epstein files released once it became clear that the Trump administration was backtracking on its promise. And I'm a proud member of the Oversight Committee. It was that committee that subpoenaed originally to have the Epstein files released. And the attorney general refused to do so. With that subpoena, they only released a very, very small bit of the files. And then the momentum kept building because the survivors were speaking out. New folks who've never spoken out on this issue before, never told their stories before, came forward. And again, public pressure worked. We had a discharge petition led by Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie. And what a discharge petition is when you think that you can't get the Speaker of the House to bring something to the floor, you can have a petition, and as long as you get a simple majority, it will force a vote. When that petition first came forward, I'm just sharing this to kind of give a sense of also hope to people. I don't think even the authors of the legislation thought that it would be possible that that would ever pass, but momentum kept building. The pressure became so strong. Eventually, we got enough signatures, it came to the floor, and by that point, this was, the topic of conversation for everybody, and so it passed near unanimously. Now, since then, we have seen a massive cover up from the White House, an attempt to hide the files, a slow release. We still, at this point, only have about 15% of the Epstein files. There have been many illegal redactions. They have now opened up the system where we can go to the Department of Justice as members of Congress to view the unredacted files. And let me tell you, you go in there, it's 4 desktop computers and very kind of janky old system. and you manually go through the files, and I've been there, and, our colleagues are, going every day, redactions of names of potential co-conspirators, redactions of names of other rich and powerful people, and not all and I'm not saying that everybody who's in the files, of course, I mean, there's so many names in the file, some are just emails that are exchanged or an article that's shared, but there are some very, very credible allegations against people and incriminating information in the files that are very damning, and last week, something that we found out that is extremely concerning is that the DOJ has withheld about 50 pages worth of FBI investigations and some interviews with a woman who had a credible allegation of sexual assault against the president when she was a minor. And so we've really been hammering on that because it is obviously unacceptable that something of that magnitude is being withheld from the American public. Depositions, there have been a number of subpoenas that have gone out for people who may or may not have been involved. And so far, I've taken part in depositions with Alex Acosta, the former labor secretary, who was the person who also gave Jeffrey Epstein the sweetheart plea deal back in 2008. We've had depositions with Lex Wexner, who is the billionaire who was the main benefactor of Jeffrey Epstein, and not one Republican member of Congress showed up to that. And then we've had the Clinton depositions, one day with Secretary Clinton, one day with President Clinton. And there's many, many more coming. I think this investigation is just getting started because, quite frankly, the more information we get, the more questions there are, and the more clear it is that there has been a cover up, not only by this administration, but a lot of questions about why the FBI and others have not further investigated many of the allegations in the files, as well as actually getting to the point of prosecuting people who have been faced with credible allegations.
Yeah, and it seems like, from all of us watching from the outside, it is so wide-ranging. It's people from all walks of life from across the political spectrum. So this is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. This
Yeah.
is an issue of child trafficking and abuse and violence against women and corruption. And so, are you seeing that the way that the information is coming out and that way that people are trying to hold folks accountable is along party lines? Are you seeing like more of like a focus on people who might be more associated with the Democratic Party, being called to account versus people who might be more associated with the Republican Party? Are you seeing that political divide there in this situation?
Yes and no. I mean, we've certainly had several Republicans who have been really strong on this. Of course, Thomas Massie, then you had several women. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, literally the end of her career and her resignation is all because of her leadership on this issue. And that's why the president came after her so strongly. And actually, it's really the president who was threatening members of Congress. I mean, he pulled Lauren Boebert to the White House Situation Room to pressure her not to or to take her name off of that discharge petition. Marjorie Taylor Greene has referenced a conversation she had with the president where he said, "Don't do this, my friends will get hurt."
Mm.
So the threat from the administration is very severe, and only a couple of the Republicans have been strong enough to hold really firm on that. And that comes to light, to your point, in the subpoenas that are being put forward. Like, for example, the truth is Hillary Clinton should never have been subpoenaed on this issue. Hillary Clinton has never met Jeffrey Epstein. Bill Clinton is fair, absolutely. But Hillary Clinton, and that became very clear during the deposition, 6 hours long, the Republicans just asked the same questions over and over again, and she just kept saying, "I literally have never met this man. Didn't know him, didn't know anything that was going on." And so it got into questions around conspiracy theories like Pizzagate and whatever. Now we have some more subpoenas coming that I think are good and important. But you see the discrepancy in terms of, I think the fear factor from Trump is something that is still hanging over people's heads, as well as when the Republicans choose to show up. To me, it's concerning that they did not show up for Les Wexner, who unquestionably had a major role in Jeffrey Epstein's life as the person responsible for his wealth. but about a dozen of them showed up to probe Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Are the redactions mostly focused on taking out people who are, associated with the Republican Party and leaving the Democrats in there? Like, is that also like playing out in political lines? Let's target the Democrats who might be in the file and kind of leave out the Republicans because of the power dynamics in Congress right now.
Absolutely. I mean, the first major release was largely focused on some of the photos that had Bill Clinton and Epstein together and, very little of Trump, although Trump has been named more than anybody else practically in the files. And many of the redactions, if you follow this closely enough, you'd know that in the last few weeks, there's files that were uploaded but then removed that pertain to Donald Trump. There were pictures and files removed pertaining to other people in the administration, like Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, who's been caught lying about his relationship with Epstein multiple times now, and others in the administration as well. I mean, there are a handful of people either in ambassadorships or high up appointments in the Trump White House who are named in the files whose names had been redacted. Les Wexner's name was illegally redacted and then fixed as well. There's no question this is a massive undertaking by the Department of Justice to do all this work. But what is really telling to me is the names that are redacted, but then there have been so many failures to redact names and identifiable information for the victims. And so we've had victims come to us absolutely devastated because now some people who've never shared their stories publicly were exposed in this ordeal. That is clearly in the law.
Yeah, it's feels malicious and evil. But anyway, we're watching, we're supporting, and thank you for pushing for this type of transparency and accountability. How you see the future of the political party system in the US? It is so polarized. It is so tribal. There's so much hate and toxicity, and it's the worst we've ever seen it. This never always been kumbaya, but this is crazy. Where are the Democrats going? Where are the Republicans going? Is there a way to correct course and have some sort of sane political system in America after this mess? Like, what does your heart and your gut tell you?
I have to be optimistic, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do this work. So I do have hope, but I do have optimism. And I think, I can't speak for the entirety of the party, but what my hope is that one, I think the times that we're in, it's the solutions that need to be put forward and where we need to go has a lot less to do with whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, but it's mostly about income inequality and class based issues. I think the fact that the majority of Americans are one paycheck away from being homeless and costs continue to rise. People can't afford rent. I mean, my generation and under, I mean, buying a home is not really on anyone's radar. Childcare is expensive. Everything is just really unbearable in the context also of just mass chaos, AI, disinformation. And so I think we really need leaders who have policies that will make life better for working people. That's just what it is. I think the candidates that are doing well right now are the ones who can really speak to that very clearly and be very clear that billionaires and corporations need to be paying their fair share so that we can have healthcare and housing in this country. I really think those candidates, again, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, are the ones that are going to be able to get the majority support. And I also think authenticity really matters. And that's different, like truly being authentic to who you are, and not trying to be some mold of another candidate. Really good recent example, I think, is James Tallarico from Texas and winning that primary. And I think that's somebody who could change Texas and could flip, that Texas seat because he is a uniter. To your point, he does want to unite people and bring people together. And he also has a vision that is more based on making life better for working people than the same old, giving tax breaks to billionaires.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the recent victories we've seen just signal that I think the next generation of political leaders, if they want to be successful, they have to transcend the normal political party lines that this isn't a Democrat issue, this is a Republican issue, and we got to kind of move beyond that. I don't think that's going to work. From my vantage point, being out in the community and society, I think people are going to start caring less about that and caring more about like unifying messages, what's going to help all of us. And I think we've seen an example of that. So I share that hope with you. But I want to turn to something that's very close to both of our hearts. You know, you and I are both Iranians living abroad, and we have both, you know, through the years, but especially in the recent months and weeks, have experienced pressure from members of our own community to take a specific stance on certain issues and certain policies. And, you know, everybody has a right to their opinion, of course. First, I wanted to get your thoughts generally on this war that the US and Israel have started with Iran.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because I was elected to represent Arizona's 3rd district, a very diverse community where more than 64 languages are spoken. And first and foremost, that is, how I make my decisions, of course, reflective of the district that I represent and what my constituents want. And I have heard loudly and clearly from my constituents that in a time where they cannot afford healthcare and Medicaid is being ripped away and food assistance is being ripped away and housing is unaffordable, they do not want to see the United States of America engaged in another endless war in the Middle East. I mean, that is overwhelmingly the sentiment. And I share that sentiment. I grew up during the Iraq War, Afghanistan, have worked a lot with Afghan refugees in Phoenix who have had to flee after 20 years of, war and the Taliban retaking over their country. And so I am instinctively very anti-war and anti-imposition and intervention that that could cause mass chaos and civil war in a country. At the same time, being the daughter of Iranian immigrants and having followed very closely the protests since I was in high school, the Green Movement, and then the Mahsa Amini protests and Women Life Freedom, and now the most recent one that led to such astounding massacres. I also understand, and I understand this feeling of we need help. And I believe in doctrines like the responsibility to protect and the international community's responsibility to engage if somebody's own government is massacring its own people. Where my fear comes in the current situation is that I have not seen from Donald Trump a demonstration of caring about the American people and caring about the future and democracy of this country. So I just don't trust that he then cares about the Iranian people and cares about future of democracy in Iran. And so it's hard not to be skeptical of that. And we've already seen over 1,000 civilian deaths. And the one briefing, because there's only been one briefing post the invasion for members of Congress, my questions were actually focused on whether or not a future democratic state is part of the mission and what are we doing to help ensure that that happens. And I was told pretty directly that that is not part of the mission. And this is about, of course, the nuclear sites, ballistic missiles, and the Navy. And then the Secretary of Defense said yesterday that there will be death and destruction for days on end moving forward. And so there's really never been a clear plan, clear objectives demonstrated or put forward to Congress or to the American people by this administration. And as a US Congresswoman, that is highly concerning to me. And no matter what country we were talking about, I would be asking these questions because we have to care about American lives, American service members' lives, innocent Iranian civilians who are going to be killed, and ensuring that Iran does not end up as a failed state trapped in perpetual war for the years to come.
So, what would you say to folks who our people in Iran have been under this oppressive rule and brutal regime for nearly half a century? And so I've seen people say organized force can only be, met and dealt with through organized force. and things like just help us get rid of this evil regime, and whatever comes after, we'll deal with it. How do you respond to really just tragically heartfelt and heartbroken like feelings and commentary that's coming from our community? I don't believe even people who are really passionate and have said things that might not be true because they may not agree with my politics or your politics. I think it's coming from a place of care and place of
Mhm.
hurt and trauma. So what do you say to that?
First of all, I would say that I understand and I empathize with that sentiment, and I'm not even saying that sentiment is wrong. I also believe that it would be extremely difficult to get rid of the Islamic Republic regime when you have, when they are willing to kill and imprison as many people as it takes. I agree with that. I think that what is important now that this has already happened, that the United States is already engaged, is that as many, whether it's Iranian American voices, elected leaders, anyone with a platform, try to be constructive as to what we should or should not see moving forward as it pertains to the future of Iran. So, for example, during that same briefing, I said very clearly to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that I would love to support and help in any way as it pertains to ensuring that this ends well and that this ends in a democratic future for Iran. I think tangibly right now, the United States could be doing a lot more to make sure that there's internet access for people in Iran because the regime continues to shut down the internet. I think it's very concerning that there are reports that the CIA and Israel are funding armed groups in Iraq and in Iran that could
Separatist
cause a
groups,
civil
right?
war. Yeah, so I think that is concerning, and so we should really be pushing on the importance of not falling into a civil war and maintaining the territorial integrity of Iran and making sure that the administration hears that and knows that. There's also, really bad actors like the MEK who have a lot of influence in Washington, D.C. And despite what anyone would want to really admit, have been the most organized opposition group of Iranians for the past 4 decades. They have been preparing for this moment, and they have influence, and they work very closely with those Kurdish separatist groups as well, PBKI, et cetera. So there's concern that they may get funding and try to take over the country as well. So making clear what we do not want and what we do want. And then there's the political prisoners. I really want to shed light on the political prisoners who are in Evin prison. They should be released immediately if there's anything that the US can do to support that. And then we need an off ramp. And that is something that I have not seen from the administration that I hope we will see. What is the off ramp here? How will we ensure that there's some sort of, internationally monitored free and fair elections in Iran? And again, just avoiding as many civilian casualties and chaos as possible, because regionally as well, the worst thing would be some sort of, massive refugee crisis of Iranians, where Iranians would have to flee the country and then destabilize, as we saw in Syria over the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah. And I think those are all valid concerns. And I think, as emotional as all of us are in this moment, to not think about what comes next, let's just get through this and we'll figure it out, I think is going to put us in a really difficult position afterwards. And everything you say, I think, is a concern of mine as well, including, I think people don't give enough credit to the MEK. They don't have a lot of support inside of Iran, I don't believe. But at the same time, they have been the most organized group of Iranians outside of Iran in America, and lobbying in a very organized and very financially like hefty way around this issue. So they have a lot
There
of
are
influence.
resolutions in Congress that have hundreds of co-sponsors from both parties that directly endorse Maryam Rajavi and MEK's 10-point plan for the future of Iran. And since I got to Congress last year and have become aware of that, I've been working very hard to educate my colleagues about them and about their history and their past and how they don't represent Iranians, and have been successful in getting some of that support diminished a bit. But these are some of the things that I think the Iranian American diaspora is not aware of, like the influence of certain groups here on the Hill, and also why, even if we don't agree on everything, why it is valuable to have representation. Because members of Congress are dealing with so many issues at all times, especially now, that quite frankly, this is not top of mind at all. And so it is helpful to have perspective provided and a little bit of context and education that I'm able to provide.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate it. And one last quick question on this issue. I know often growing up, you probably heard this too. Democrats have always been bad for Iran, and Republicans have always been good for Iran. And there's been a lot of conversation that I've seen you participate in the last few days around the War Powers Resolution, and you know how the president acted without going to Congress, which is required by law. And, you know, the comeback is, well, President Biden, President Obama also sidestepped that, engaged in attacks without. And so, why are the Democrats only picking on, you know, this president who is a Republican who's decided to go after Iran? How do you respond to this?
Well, from my perspective, I criticize the past Democratic administrations who may have engaged in strikes without coming to Congress. I think Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government, and that is a very important part of our Constitution. But also, this level of engagement to which the administration has now, I mean, they'll call it a war and then they'll take it back, but they've called it a war many times. They started a war. That has never happened like this without, let me take a step back. Even the war in Iraq, there was a year's worth of public conversation and debate and making the case to the American people, even with flawed intelligence, which we now know, the case was made to the American people. So there was buy-in. Right now, there is no buy-in for this war at all. And I think that is extremely concerning. I mean, only 1 in 4 Americans, the day after the first military strikes, said they supported those strikes. And the Iranian American diaspora community also does need to think about that the case was not made. The war is illegal because constitutionally, the president should have come to Congress. And that to me is extremely important because my number one priority is this democracy remaining intact. And the fact that we have a president who is illegally engaging in so many wars around the country, around the world, from Venezuela to threatening to seize Greenland, talking about doing the same thing in Cuba, talking about, you know, just taking over these countries. It's not popular with the American people, and it's what dictators do. And I don't want to see a dictatorship unfold here in the United States. So that's what's important. And the war powers is very specifically only saying that the president needs to come to Congress. It's not even giving a verdict on whether you support the military action or not. It's saying the president needs to come to Congress, make the case, and then there would be a separate vote on whether or not you support these actions. So that's why it's so important. That's why it has bipartisan support, and that's why it's, you know, critical to me as an American to make sure that our Constitution stands.
And you would be doing the same if the president was a Democrat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think, you know, sometimes we speak with our elected officials and leaders, and, you know, we just sort of place them in boxes. You're all human. So I want to ask questions about, you know, Yasamin Ansari. Um,
Sure.
so I wanted to ask you moments you have experienced maybe in your early life that shaped your personhood long before you found yourself at the forefront of politics and a political career that might have led to you pursuing this type of work. But what was it before you were here that led you to this path that shaped who you are today?
Two things come to mind. I mean, first of all, my mom was always very, very civically engaged, and I remember her repeating to me over and over again that we can't take democracy for granted and you can't take freedom for granted. And, you know, while pre-Islamic Republic Iran wasn't quite a democracy, you know, obviously in her mindset, there were freedoms. And she would say to me, you know, I saw my country fall apart overnight and everything change. And so don't take for granted that you have that here. It could be lost. And so she would always take me to volunteer, and I would see her late at night calling our senators and giving her input and leaving voicemails. And so she as a person has always really made a big difference. And then the moment or the event for me when I got super excited about politics was Barack Obama's first election as president. I was 16. He was running against the late senator from Arizona, John McCain. But I just got so inspired by his candidacy. And that's when I started getting involved with local politics and volunteering with the Arizona Democratic Party. And I was just so inspired by him and the vision of unity for the country. And so I think after that, I could never quite turn back.
Mm-hmm. So examples parents set are important. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And my final question, I always ask this of all the guests. You heard the reason that I started this podcast is to just to level set and reset some conversations that have been hijacked and weaponized in this sort of polarized reality that we live in. And so I wanted to ask, what is one conversation that you would like to reset? And it doesn't have to, it can, but it doesn't have to, relate to anything that we've talked about. Somebody in the past has said, I want to reset the conversation around relationships. Why should I take advice from like online accounts about wait 10 minutes or 5 minutes before texting back? Somebody wanted to reset the conversation around joy. Somebody wanted to reset the conversation, I think that was me, around how people look at this. Oh, this is happening in Iran, so it's my problem. It's happening in Venezuela, it's not my problem. Like my conversation to reset it was like, it's all our problems. Anything that you think just has gone off the rails and we got to get it back on track.
I would say the conversation around social media etiquette. And I'm clearly speaking from a public official's standpoint, but I just think this inability to have thoughtful, respectful conversations and people really taking to social media to bash one another and to like remove nuance from conversations is a huge, huge problem. And I think it's really contributed to the division that exists. I think a lot of people say things on social media that they would never say face to face to someone. I don't know how we change it, but it's just become so toxic. And, it affects everybody, I think is contributing largely to mental health crises as well in the world.
That's a good one. And as somebody, as you and I have talked off camera, who has also experienced it as well as you, I think if you're doing any sort of work that's impactful, you're going to get some of that. But it has really gone to a level that's beyond healthy. So I will gladly help you reset that and know that for every comment that's not polite and crass and rude, there's just as many, if not more, supporting and approving of what you're doing. And, you have a lot of love and support in the community. And I wish you the best of luck. And thank you, Yasamin John, as we would say in Farsi. It's a term of endearment. Thank you, Congresswoman Ansari, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. And best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, take care. And that's it for us in this episode. Thank you for joining. Please follow and support Congresswoman Ansari. Find her on social media, engage with her, give her constructive feedback, whether you agree with her or not. She's open to listening. So I think the more we can engage in that type of constructive feedback and awareness raising versus rabble rousing and hateful speech online is really important. I hope you found this episode and this conversation helpful. Please take it back into your world and reset what you can. Subscribe to Reset Critical on the platforms where you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media. Until next time, stay hopeful. Thanks for tuning in to Reset Critical. Remember, the opinions you heard today belong to our guests and don't necessarily reflect the views of the institutions they represent, the host, producers, or our sponsors and affiliates. Mentions of products or organizations aren't endorsements. We're here to spark ideas and dialogue. Until next time, take care and keep thinking critically.